Welcome back to the Brahmin Word, and we are continuing on with the life of Noah. I do want to apologize. Last Thursday, time just got away from me, but we are back at it today. So go back to Genesis chapter 6. We're going to look at the rest of the chapter, verses 9 through 22. We're going to see the announcement that God gives to Noah that he is to build this ark. We won't get to the actual construction until Thursday. But when it comes to just the announcement and the fact that Noah had to have faith despite the unknown, because, well, there was the flood was a mystery at that time, which we'll get to in a second. But he does it still. And so we will get into all of that here in just a little bit. So, with that being said, Genesis chapter 6, verse 9. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. And Noah had three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So, right off the bat, we see three characteristics of Noah. And so he is righteous, he is blameless in his generation, and then he walked with God. So, first off, these terms, righteous and blameless, they do not mean that Noah was perfect. Instead, he had a moral compass, which, as we saw in the first part of chapter 6, was not the case for many people at that time, if not everybody, despite Noah and his family. But then blameless is really interesting. So, blameless on the surface appears that you could get caught up in this word and think, okay, it means perfect. But the Hebrew word here actually really means like complete or sound. So, what this is really getting at is that, yes, Noah is not sinless, but uh, with the uh, with the clause that follows it in his generation, that just points to the fact that Noah uh, was not to blame for his when it comes to comparison with the generation that he lived in. Yes, he was not sinless, but compared to the generation that he was surrounded by, which, as we saw, and as we'll see again in verse 11, was completely corrupt. Noah and his godly character stood out, or you could say that it was holy or set apart. And that is why he is considered blameless, not because he is sinless, but because he actually had godly character in the midst of a context that was not godly. And then finally, when it comes to Noah walking with God, this kind of gives us a flashback to Genesis 5, specifically Genesis 5:24, where we see with Enoch, Genesis 5:24, Enoch walked with God and he was not, for God took him. Now, obviously, Enoch in himself is something for another day, but the main thing that I want to look at is the phrase walked with God, because it is very, of course, it is very similar to Noah walking with God. However, there is a little bit of a difference in the construction of these two phrases, Enoch walked with God and Noah walked with God. Here, you could actually, now it wouldn't sound correct in our context, in our English context, but here you could say it this way because this is how it's constructed. With God walked Noah. And so, what I think is going on here, and the reason why the author wrote it this way, is to show you the dependence that Noah has to have on the Lord. And well, especially knowing what we're about to see, the announcement that is about to be given, he really does have to have that dependence on the Lord. Um, And then finally, I think the reason why the sons are mentioned here, yes, because it's to show that there is going to be not just Noah and his wife, but there is going to be more people on the ark besides the two of them. But I think the main reason, too, another big reason that they're mentioned, is to show that Noah is not going to be taking this project on his own. Uh, his sons will help out with the building of this ark. So, in a way, they have to have the same level of faith, even though we attribute a lot of faith to Noah, which is true. Don't get me wrong. But Shem, Ham, and Japheth also really have to have a level of faith because they could have easily said to their father, "This is crazy. Why are we doing this?" and could have left the project. But instead, they stay on and they stay by their father. Now, there's obviously a sense of loyalty there, but I also think there is a level of faith there that we don't really think about when it comes to Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So just something that I thought was interesting. So now, verse 11, we're going back to looking at the context of the flood. Verse 11. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight. And this is chapter 6, sorry. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. So again, it's just the idea that the creation, God's creation, has turned on him and has become corrupt to the point where uh, God is so just saddened by their choices, and so now he has come up with a plan. Verse 13, and God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. And make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. Now, before we get into the measurements of the ark, which are fascinating, I do want to spend a little bit of time on the first thing that he mentions, that God mentions in verse 13. I've determined to make an end of all flesh. Or another way of thinking about it, you could interpret it as well, is I've determined to make an end, or make the end of all flesh. Um, or sorry, the end of all flesh has come before me. So it's the idea that this is not a surprise. Like it's just he is not just uh, a just cruel God that punishes for no reason. No, there is definitely a reason. Because for the earth is filled with violence through them. And I think what God is trying to get at is that he's not saying that after the ark and after the flood, the world is going to be perfect because Noah is just somewhat more godly. No, sin is still within the world, and we will see that in the life of Noah later. Sin is very much still in the world and has its stain on the world, which continues all the way through, of course, the big moment with the resurrection, the crucifixion, the resurrection of Jesus, which then defeats sin when it comes to the eternal destination that you and I can go to. But we still are in a sinful world until Jesus returns and defeats Satan for good. And so that is very much the case here. Just because Noah and his family are going to survive the ark, it does not mean that there will no longer be sin in the world. There still is. But I think what it's trying to get at is God is wanting to start anew with this man that is righteous and blameless, and to try to continue to show grace to his creation. Because, yes, Noah is considered righteous and blameless by God, but he is still not perfect. And so he could have been wiped out as well. Noah and his family, and that would have been seen as justified because God's standard is perfection. But thankfully, that is not the case. He gives grace to Noah, and of course, with you and I as followers of Jesus, we are given grace through the sacrifice and then the resurrection of Jesus. So, with that being said, let's get into these measurements because this is fascinating. Verse 15. This is how you are to make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits, its breadth 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. So the measurements of this is astounding. So basically, it all comes down to how long is a cubit. It's hard because basically it's the idea was you go from your elbow to the tip of your longest finger. And so that, of course, was not the greatest measuring scale back in the day because everybody's different. However, through just time and records, we can kind of pinpoint an approximate range. So, for instance, it could be anywhere from 17 and a half inches, which we see in ancient Hebrew, to 20.4 inches. So it's somewhere in that ballpark. So with that being said, with the idea of cubits, so this thing could be with the measurements that are given. This thing could be anywhere from 440 feet in length to 510 feet in length to 72 feet in width to 85 feet in width, and then 43 feet in height to 51 feet in height. I mean, this thing is massive. Is huge how big this ark is. And of course, with everything that the Lord is about to tell him to bring onto the ark, it has to be that big. By the way, if you would love to see a pretty accurate, pretty close estimation to this size range, go down to Kentucky. I believe it's Williamsport. And there is something called the Ark Encounter there. It is from Answers in Genesis. It is a great experience. I would recommend everybody to go at some point. It is phenomenal to see how big this thing really potentially could have been based on the measurements that we are given and the range that those cubits are based on scholarly work into what a cubit was. And so this thing is massive. But it gets more interesting. Verse 16. Make a roof for the ark and finish it to a cubit above, and set the door of the ark in its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring two of every sort into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds according to their kinds, and of the animals according to their kinds, and of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind, two of every sort shall come into you to keep them alive. Also take with you every sort of food that is eaten, and store it up. It shall serve as food for you and for them. And then we have this big statement, verse 22. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. So you have all of these different instructions about how many decks there are, how much space there should be, about all the animals that are to be brought in, and then all the food that should be brought in as well. It's a massive undertaking. And of course, again, Noah's not on his own. God is there to help him and his family as well. For me, I think the big one, of course, the big part of this whole section in verses 9 through 22 is verse 22. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. He just heard about this thing called a flood, which what is a flood? In Noah's context, that really is not a silly question. It really is a genuine question. What is a flood? They have no idea what a flood is. What do you mean? Like, we know what water is, but how? What's a flood of waters? What does that even mean? How can that destroy all flesh? How can that cover the earth? And so this is a very confusing point for Noah, and yet it just says Noah did this, and he did all that God commanded him. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm sure there were probably questions in Noah's mind and in Noah's heart about what am I doing? What's happening? What's going to happen? Uh, I'm sure it definitely crossed his mind. But yet, even despite those questions, he goes forward in faith with the project. For you and I think the biggest thing is the faith in the unknown. Yes, we may not be called to build a 510-foot ark or a 510-foot long ark with a 51-foot height. Uh, uh, we're probably not called to do that. If you are, kudos to you. That it'll take a very, very long time. Even with the amount of machinery that we have today, which we'll get to that when we get to the actual building of the ark on Thursday. Uh, but for me, I think that's a big part of it. So for you and I, when we are looking into the unknown, whether it's a new career, whether it's a new, uh, whether it's going to live in a new place, there is this unknown that we can very understandably be very terrified of at times and not know what's going to happen. But like Noah, I hope that we do what God has asked us to do, that we do what God has commanded us to do, and we go forward with the faith that we see that Noah has. And so I hope for your sake, because I definitely feel this way at times as well, that we have just that kind of faith with the within the face of the unknown. So I hope for you that this is an encouragement. And so, with that being said, thanks for spending a little bit of time with me today on the Brahmin Word. We will be back for the building of the ark in chapter 7 on Thursday. So I will see you then. Thanks.